welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. This Sunday, we celebrate another International Women's Day, and in recognition of that, this edition is dedicated to close to 60 crore women of India. At one level, the word celebrate sits oddly with women when we talk in the Indian context. But at another level, there is no disputing that women have come a long way over the years. Noted economist Joan Robinson once said of India, and I quote, "Whatever you can rightly say of India, the opposite is also true." And nowhere is this more true than perhaps in the case of women in India, where on the one hand you have women like the experts that we have on our panel, and on the other we also have women who unfortunately in the vast majority who struggle for survival as equal citizens. One small caveat before we begin. There are many dimensions to the status of women in India. But since this is a program that focuses on economics, so with your permission, we'll look at women through the prism of the economy. I must confess that as an economist by training and former banker, I strongly believe economic empowerment is the answer, if not a complete one, to many of the ills that women in our country suffer from today. So with that rather long introduction, let me welcome to the show Naina Lal Kidwai, former Group General Manager, HSBC, and also former president of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Flavia Agnes, noted lawyer and women's rights activist, and Professor A.K. Shivakumar, development economist, who also teaches at the Ashoka University and Harvard. Now, so let me welcome to the show all three of you. It is said that money is what makes a mare go round. So let me start by asking each of you in turn whether you agree with me when I say that financial independence is perhaps the single biggest enabler when it comes to women's emancipation. Or am I being swayed by my own background? Let me start with you, Naina.
How could I say otherwise, Mythili? Of course, finance is important. Economic empowerment of women is important. And if you look at the whole space, of course, of entrepreneurship and banking, if we cannot bring women into the workforce through the financial empowerment that we provide and the economic empowerment we provide, we miss an entire contribution to the GDP of the country. The average, global average is 45% of, in most countries where women's participation in GDP counts for something. And in India, it's at 22%. So we have a long way to go. The more interesting one, I think, is also the whole area of self-help groups and microfinance, where we have seen how women at the grassroots level participate in every aspect of economic development, but even more critically, are able to not just be the economic force in their families, but help in the development of rural India. So I think no matter how you look at it, the economic empowerment and engagement of women through entrepreneurship, through self-help groups is critical for the country.
Shivakumar, according to the latest gender gap report of the World Economic Forum, amongst the 153 countries that were studied, India is the only country where the economic gender gap is larger than the political gender gap. Why would such a thing happen, Professor Shivakumar?
You know, let me say that economic empowerment is absolutely essential, but it should not become an end in itself. I mean, we are promoting economic empowerment because the benefits to society are enormous, not just in terms of productivity and growth, but in terms of improving child survival. When women start working and paid employment, health improves, nutrition improves, the balance of power within the household changes, domestic violence goes down, and also the practice of democracy improves. So in a sense, we must push for economic empowerment and employment of women for all the other benefits as well. And because if India has to really become a $5 trillion economy, it is by investing in women, investing in health, in their education, in their nutrition, and in the well-being of society. So I think that's an important point. As far as the gender gap is concerned, I think it's a very important issue, not just that the levels of female labor force participation are extremely low in India, but this gender gap is worrying, because if we really want to see the economy and the society developing and progressing, we have to get more and more women into the paid workforce. Today, 75% of women in rural India are unpaid or underpaid. Their work is not recognized. They are in extremely vulnerable conditions of employment. There are no benefits at all. So we really have to address this gender gap in a very significant way. And there are very many ways that can be done.
Okay, we'll discuss this a little later, what can be done a little later in the program. But Flavia, the Indian constitution is perhaps unique in allowing the state to make laws that specifically favor women. And the state, in all fairness, has passed a number of such laws to ensure that women get a fair deal. So why is it that despite all this, women are largely missing when it comes to the economy? Flavia?
I believe economic empowerment is very important, but that's not enough. Unless the work situation is conducive to the challenges that women face, a large number of women drop out of organized sector for various reasons of their gender roles at home. They're supposed to, even while working outside, they're supposed to do all the work at home, including cater to the husband's need, children's need, in-laws' need. They have to do a whole lot of range of things. If you have family support, like an elder woman in the house, that really helps women to continue. But if you don't have, then they have to opt out. Some women make a re-entry, but it's not very easy. After a long gap of like 10 years or 15 years, it's not very easy for women to come out. So these are mechanisms that are very conducive to women working, that the employers have to be sensitive to why women are not able to continue their employment. So this is one thing. Secondly, while it's true that domestic violence goes down if a woman is earning, but that's not all. I have met many women who, despite being an earning member, doing financially okay, are still oppressed at home and they're not able to articulate. I've also watched women from self-help groups very closely, given them training on the Domestic Violence Act, about their rights, etc. But they're so ignorant. So while they do this economic empowerment, we do not expose them to what rights they have, where they have to go, how they can empower themselves further. So if you're not working, it's even bad. It's worse for women. But even if you are earning member, there's no guarantee that there won't be domestic violence.
Sure, it is necessary but not a sufficient condition, as economists like to say. In fact, Naina, Flavor brings me to my next question, is that women's ability to contribute to the economy is constrained by the support structures that are available to them. Because the reality, whether one likes it or not, is that things like childcare, elder care, etc. are still seen as a woman's responsibility, especially in the Indian context. Now, CSR is part of the statute, and promoting gender equality and empowering women is listed as one of the permissible activities. But is that perhaps too general? So could we think of being more specific, saying that setting up creches, elder care centers should be part of CSR, Naina?
Mythili, of course, but I don't think it should be CSR. It should be part of the DNA of the organization in any case. And many forward-thinking organizations recognize this. To make the workplace friendly for women, I would say it should almost be a requirement that this exists and that the option of the creche is provided to women, whether at the workplace or otherwise. Some women prefer having a creche near a home or the facility to be able to do this. But I think Flavia's hit on the very critical aspect, and indeed Shiv touches on it as well, which is the entire ecosystem has to move in that direction. And it has to start with the way men think about women at the workplace, not just in terms of the way they interact, but men at home. And I would like to believe that at least of the millennial generation in the corporate workplace, there is better sharing of responsibilities at home. Because unless that happens, and unless the attitude of women to women, how does the mother-in-law or the mother respond to her daughter or daughter-in-law who goes to work, we are not going to see significant change. The issue, of course, at the rural level is different, and I think Flavia is very right in saying that self-help groups are all very well, but there has to be an entire ecosystem behind it that helps. And to my mind, the big difference in terms of microfinance at the self-help group level is not just the money that is given the women, but if we can simultaneously also train them in a profession and give them the tools Flavia's referred to in terms of their rights, their understanding. And I know, and I've seen through the wonderful work that Seva does, it is not enough to work in a very small group. You need to have a large unit of women so they can all support each other.
Okay, Naina, I hope you're right on that. Shivkumar, Naina talked about the entire eco-support structure. So what explains the decline of women's share in the workforce? We've heard a number of explanations, including things like urbanization, more women studying longer. But given your vast experience, what do you think is the most likely explanation? And will things like free bus rides for women, as announced by the Delhi government, really increase the scope for women's participation, or are they merely populist measures? Shivkumar?
No, I think we have to do everything in the book to ensure that opportunities for women to work improve, including transportation, safe travel, but also less sexual harassment at the workplace and so on and so forth. But I want to pick on a small point that was both made by Flavia and Naina about the male responsibility. Since I'm the only man in this panel,
Sure.
I should have an opportunity to
many responsibilities.
I completely agree that it is men's responsibility to play a much greater role in sharing family and household responsibilities. But I also want to make a point that Naina was saying, that there is a responsibility of women to women. Because if you saw the National Family Health Survey, the third one, which was done in 2005-2006, 54% of women agreed that a husband was justified in beating his wife.
My God,
women.
terrible.
10 years later, when the survey is repeated in 2015-2016, that percentage came down from 54% to 52%. So it is 52% of women, more than half the women in India, believe that a husband is justified in beating his wife. This is the stranglehold of patriarchy and the male domination of how households should run, families should be managed, that really is a binding constraint on women going out of the house and working. So if you ask me why are fewer and fewer women working today, part of the reason is that they are just not given the freedom and the opportunities to go out and work. So I think the transformation has to really come from a big societal change where men and women, parents, start thinking differently about what is the role of women, the opportunities of women.
That's a terrible indictment of our society, Shivakumar. But Flavia, let me ask you this question, which is also related to women's power. Ownership of property, I think, is a powerful economic enabler. But we find women are discriminated against it even when it comes to land and property rights. And despite things like lower stamp duty, lower registration tax, etc., when property is registered in women's name, most women still do not own any property in their own names. And even though the Hindu law on succession has been changed recently to ensure that women get a share in ancestral property, things haven't changed on the ground. And in this, I'm going to ask you, are women themselves their worst enemy? Because many men are hesitant to really come out and make a claim. Flavia.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I was coming to that point. It's not only just mother-in-law or the work environment. Even these values are internalized by women themselves. And that's very important. Now we have here two problems. One is, of course, the dowry problem at the time of marriage, that you are given a certain amount of money and it's believed, despite the change in law, that is in lieu of your inheritance rights. But what is given is a pittance, and it's nothing compared to what the property the parents own, whether it's land, whether it is property, whether savings, whatever. And the responsibility is on the son to look after the parents, and that's why he should inherit. Women themselves feel, firstly, they also want dowry. Secondly, they feel once you're married, you don't have any rights at home, you cannot claim. And thirdly, the biggest barrier is our court system. The property rights go to civil court, and the civil court litigation is long drawn, expensive, and most of these cases that are filed in court is at the insistence of their husband. Women are not keen about it. They don't want to break the relationship in their natal family. They want to have a harmonious relationship with their brothers, because that is their support structure they will fall back on when they have domestic violence at home. You are threatened with disposition of the home. This is one major barrier. The second barrier is, in divorce cases, we do not have a law which other countries have, is division of matrimonial property. So for most women, divorce results in destitution. Whatever they have contributed to the household and the property is brought in the husband's name, they don't have any right, and if they're working, they're not even entitled to maintenance.
Flavia, we've touched upon a pet peeve of mine, the miserable state of the judiciary in this country, but I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. Please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and in this edition dedicated to the women of India, we're discussing the role of women in the context of the economy. Naina, you've been a role model in many ways. How important is it to have role models to end gender stereotyping? And how do you feel when you're described as the first woman to achieve something, whether X or Y? Does it in some way take away from the achievement, or is it something that all women will have to live with? And if it helps other women, why not? Naina?
You know, Mythili, role models, well, many of us didn't have too many women role models at all. And I can only say that sometimes injustices can actually be the agent of change. So when you believe that something is your right, or that you're good enough and maybe better than, say, a male colleague, and you are not given the promotion, that you stand up and fight for it. So I would say that if we can enable women to understand where the injustice is and where it exists, then in order for them to see it for what it is, that becomes the agent of change. But again, it cannot happen through each woman individually. It has to be a movement. And for that movement, I think the education that we provide women, the aspirations that we give them on the one hand, should also be armed with some of the tools, whether judicial or otherwise, that they can use, or the support systems that they can use going forward. I think organizations, I was very fortunate to work in companies which were largely multinational at the time. Indian companies hadn't quite understood this as well, where at least there was a stated desire to create an equal opportunity and even playing field. And that becomes the ecosystem that you can then at least rely on to help you go forward. So we need to create a system where not only do people hear that equal opportunities are there, but our women should know that they can go to the Flavias of the world and others to get the support that they need. And I think the NGOs we have that provide these services are fantastic. We just need more of them. We need to know where they are, and our women need to be able to reach them, whether in the corporate workplace or in rural India.
Shivakumar, Naina touched upon a thing that I'm going to move to now, because the FM in a recent budget speech spoke about how girls now outnumber boys at every level of school education. So some 20 years down the line, will we see a sharp increase in women's participation in the economy, or does education in India remain largely skin deep? Cultural, social changes are very, very slow. Shivakumar?
Yeah, I think the issue of education is very important, but we should not forget that even today, if you look at the female rural workforce, almost 50% are illiterate, and 20% have less than primary school education. So we have a long way to go in terms of promoting education. And when it comes to school enrollment and secondary school enrollment, 70% of girls are dropping out before they complete secondary education. So there's a huge amount of effort that really needs to go into getting not just schools, girls into schools and ensuring enrollment, but ensuring that they complete 12 years of schooling. And I think that still remains a challenge for very many reasons. And beyond school also, how do you get into, even today 85% of students in ITIs, the technical training institutes, are boys, and they are not women at all. So 15% of women in this training institute. So there's a lot that we need to do. And I think, how do we crack this problem? Yes, by providing schooling, but we also have to hit at the institution of marriage. I think we cannot have a conversation about greater freedom and opportunities for women unless we recognize that the biggest stumbling block is the pressure of society on young girls from their parents to get married at the age of 18, 19, and so on and so forth. And it's very sad that when we're talking about economic freedoms of women, women just don't have the freedom to choose, decide when they want to get married, whom they want to get married, and have virtually no control over fertility decisions.
Flavia, Shivakumar spoke about the fact that women still don't have free choice. So does empowering women politically, as we've seen with reservation for women at the Panchayati Raj level, translate into a greater economic voice? In which case, why should we not push harder for reservation at the parliamentary level? And why is it that the government that talks about Beti Bachao, etc., is not doing more in this respect? Does a political voice play a major part?
I think here there are two kinds of problems. Firstly, I want to say why girls are married at the age of 18 or 19 or 20 when they're contributing to their family income is that age group, say 15 to 25, is extremely vulnerable to societal violence. There's a lot of sexual violence that's happening, the stories about rapes that are taking on in a small village. The parents are extremely anxious. There is this patriarchal tendency to control women's sexuality, and unless we challenge that, that's the core of this entire problem, that we don't trust our girls. We think that if they're not abused and sexually violated, they will choose a person of their choice who is not from the community, who is lower down in status, etc. So the parents view both these problems in the same scale. That is, a rape also you are violated, if you have a boyfriend also you are violated, and that's when they take them out of the institutions and get them married in a hurry. We have a lot of rape victims. In fact, we have a support program for rape victims, a socio-legal support system, and we see this. They just wait for their evidence in court to be recorded, and they send the girl, whether she's capable, whether she wants it, whatever it is. Firstly, there is neglect at home. She's reduced to domestic drudgery, even if she's mentally challenged, whatever her status, physically disabled, whatever. And then they send her off, and they only one desire to get my daughter married. This happens across class, middle class, working class, everyone. They feel it is their sacred duty to get their daughters married. After marriage, the husband and mother-in-law will control her sexuality. It's really true. I mean, this is what is actually happening. So it's not only the societal violence, but domestic violence.
Not very happy things to hear.
And after that, the husband feels they don't trust women going out.
So I said not a very happy thing to hear from you, Flavia, but you clearly speak from the experience of the women with whom you engage. In fact, you've answered my last question, which I was planning to ask the three of you all over again, but you have answered it all. So let me ask this question to Naina and Shivakumar. So that many of the issues posed in the 2001 report authored by Shivakumar and Kalyani Menon Sen about women in India, how free, how equal, are as relevant today, sadly, as in 2001. So let me ask you, Naina, to what extent are women free in India to really choose what they want to do and free to be what they want to be? Would you agree with Flavia that things have really not changed very much, Naina?
You know, Mythili, this question really has to be answered differently for different parts of society and, frankly, for different parts of the country. But on the whole, I would say, that we cannot be right now where we need to be, which is that women should be free to make the choices. Society makes the choices for women, and that is going to take a while to change. But what we should all be working on, as indeed we saw in areas like sanitation, that behavior change, if we put our minds and hearts to it, can be achieved. It can be achieved if we get out there, if we create a Jan Andolan, a people's movement, which then brings about the change, that respect for women. And in that, I think foremost is security, because it underpins everything. If a woman is not safe when she moves around outside of her home, it impacts everything. And Flavia is absolutely right to say that it is also the fear of rape. It is that which can also force a family to ensure that the women, the young daughter is married as quickly as possible. So let's ensure that basic rights like humanity and security are provided, and maybe other things then just fall into place. I would just add that I'm all for education of women, but I've also seen how relatively illiterate women, given the right tools of economic empowerment, have risen to that challenge and indeed are now not just independent, but they have a voice where she gets up and she's proud to say her name, that she's not known as her husband's wife or the mother of her son, and where that collective voice at the village level then gets heard by all the men there, because she is the earner in the family. So I'm really a big believer in economic empowerment and giving the right tools to women to also be an agent of change.
Shivakumar, I'm sure you agree with everything both Naina and Flavia have said. So, but when you look back, do you look back with things when you see how things were in 2001 and you see how they are in 2019? Do you look back with despair, or do you look back with hope, look forward with hope? And do you feel that asking society to change is much too slow? We need to do something, more concrete to hasten this process of change. If so, very quickly, what could they be?
I think almost 20 years ago, when Kalyani Menon Sen and I co-authored that report, much has happened, and I think I'm really hopeful of the agency of young women, particularly youth, who are really bringing about change in society. So I think that there's hope and there is optimism. Now, in terms of what you would ask should be the priorities at this point of time, I'd pick up on security that Nayana was talking about, and say that ending violence against women has to be a top priority, and safety within the household as much as outside the household, in transport and in the workplace. Because unless we end domestic violence, you cannot end violence against children as well, which is a huge problem. So ending violence against women is necessary for ending violence against children. Second, I think there is a huge potential for creating jobs which are desperately needed for women, particularly in sectors that are more conducive to hiring women, like health and education. Third, I've already talked about safety in the workplace, safety while going to work, and so these jobs have to be really created in tier 2, tier 3 smaller towns and clusters where women can go as a group, and that's the success of Bangladesh as well, where these clusters of employment for young women were created, and that also reinforces the sense of security. Fourth, and I think this is where the government has to come in a big way, is to really invest much larger resources in improving health, reproductive health, child nutrition, and also providing childcare facilities for women, so that it makes it easier for women if they have daycare centers or Anganwadi centers that are well functioning, to leave their children and go to work. Okay. So there's lots that can be done and needs to be done if we are really growing at this kind of, if we are having this kind of economic growth, the potential to divert resources is also extremely high.
Okay, so that's a slightly more optimistic way to end this program, because we've really run out of time completely. Because when it comes to women, even if we narrow it down to women and their contribution to the economy, there is so much to be discussed. But I do hope society will be listening, our viewers will be listening, and there is some awakening of sensitivity to women's issues. Thank you so much, Nayana, Flavia, and Mr. Shiv Kumar, for joining me in the discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.